Hello everyone, and welcome back to another reaction. Today we are taking a look at Napoleon's Marshals, Part 1 by Epic History TV. And yeah, these are the men that represent Napoleon's Grande Armée. These are the men that represents the term Napoleonic warfare. And yeah, I'm sure Epic History TV will tell us a lot about their lives, and hopefully I can add something along the way. So without further ado, let's get going.
Terror belli, decus pacis. Terror in war, ornament in peace. The words inscribed on every French marshal's baton.
I like that motto. It's very fitting.
In France, the title of marshal or maréchal goes back at least to the 13th century. It represents the highest possible position of military authority. Authority symbolized by a marshal's baton. The title was abolished.
Yeah, and it's important to remember here, though, that the title of Marshal or Field Marshal has existed in virtually every European army, going back a very long time. Now it depends on which country's history you're studying, but the rank of Marshal does appear everywhere. And their authority is almost always symbolized by the use of a baton, which is an interesting choice of display for power and authority. But yeah, it's not a rank exclusive to the French, although it might have existed in France longer than most other places, and it's a highly prestigious rank to achieve. It's not only a military rank, but it also symbolizes high civil status. And yeah, as they just said here, the rank was abolished during the French Revolution because it was not egalitarian enough. And Napoleon, of course, he would, reverse some of the revolution's more extreme measures, and he will bring back the marshalate
During the French Revolution, as incompatible with the egalitarian spirit of the age. But in 1804, Napoleon founded a new empire and restored the ancient rank. That year, he picked 18 of France's best generals and made them marshals of the empire. 8 more were created in the years that followed. The marshals outranked everyone in the new empire, apart from Napoleon's family, princes, and ministers of state. They came from every background, sons of aristocrats and innkeepers, professional soldiers, and those who'd learned on the job, old-school Republicans and Bonaparte loyalists. The youngest, just half the age of the oldest.
Yeah, it's a really remarkable and colorful collection of people we're going to learn about. And that's what makes Napoleon's marshalate so very unique compared to other marshals from other eras, is that the group was very big. There were at least 20 marshals at any given time. And usually the rank of marshal was exclusive only to a very select group of people, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 persons. So Napoleon's marshalate was very big, and like they said, the marshals came from every sort of background you can imagine, which was very unusual because, of course, in the past, only aristocrats could achieve the rank of marshal. And they were very diverse in age too. Some really, really young guy like Davout, who's only 34 years old when he becomes a marshal. And that's practically unheard of. Usually the rank of marshal were achieved closer to the age of Marshal Kellerman there, aged 68. That's about when you could expect to be given such a prestigious rank, unless you were a prodigy of some kind, like Marshal Turenne and persons like that.
And though Marshal was a civil title, not strictly a military rank, the men known to the army as les gros bonnets, the big hats, were arguably the most extraordinary, diverse, brilliant, and flawed group of military commanders in history.
Oh yes. There were so many flaws with these guys, but also they were so brilliant, many of them. And they all had very different sort of personality traits. We have the very stern disciplinarian in Davout, and then we have the colorful, flamboyant Murat, and others in between that spectrum. And of course, like he said, the title of Marshal is not strictly a military rank, though it's primarily one. It is also a civil rank, which, among other things, entitles the marshals at a high standing at court. It also entitles them to, vast amounts of donations from Napoleon. Their annual salary could be as high as 1 million francs per year, although only, I think, Berthier and Ney broke the 1 million mark. But regardless, it is a very, like I said before, prestigious title, even outside military life.
The most favoured were showered with titles and wealth. But the price too was high. Half were wounded, 3 were killed or died of wounds. 2 were executed. This is Epic History TV's guide to Napoleon's marshals. All 26 have been ranked according to our own evaluation of their achievements as marshals, with expert guidance from retired Lieutenant Colonel Remy Porte, former chief historian of the French Army. First, a thank you to our sponsor, Call of War. More than 2,000 French generals served in the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. Many were brilliant leaders. A few probably deserved to be marshals, more than some.
Oh, definitely.
Any selection can only be difficult and highly subjective, but here's our pick of 12 of the best.
Now, technically, the rank was supposed to be restricted to the most able generals in the army. However, in practice, this was not always the case. Napoleon picked whoever he chose to become a marshal. And we have some of these characters that are obviously underqualified. For example, Marshal Bessières is the most clear example of this. He had basically done nothing before he became a marshal. And so, yeah, there were definitely some other generals who deserved to receive a marshal's baton. And some of them actually did later on, but yeah.
Bertrand, Napoleon's faithful aide-de-camp, who commanded 4th Corps at the Battle of Leipzig.
Bertrand is a very close confidant of Napoleon's. He is, like you said, he was a faithful aide-de-camp, served Napoleon at every engagement and served close by him. And when the Marshal Duroc, Grand Marshal Duroc, died in 1813, he was named Napoleon's his third and last Grand Marshal of the Palace, which was responsible for Napoleon's household while on campaign and all, yeah. And he actually accompanied Napoleon into exile on St. Helena. And he was very, how should I say it? He appealed very much to future governments to have Napoleon's remains returned to France. And he was eventually successful. And he actually went to St. Helena and was there when they exhumed Napoleon's remains and brought it back to France. Definitely someone who could have been a marshal.
Clausel, a veteran commander of the war in Spain.
Clausel, what can we say about Clausel? While on exile on St. Helena, Napoleon named 3 generals he thought were his best. And he mentioned Marshal Suchet, he mentioned General Gerard, and General Clausel. And like they said, he had served a lot during the Peninsular War. He was an important general there, fighting in Spain, which, was a pretty thankless task. He became a marshal after the July Revolution of 1830. In 1831, he received his marshal's baton from the hands of King Louis Philippe, and he also played a major role in the French invasion and occupation of Algeria during the 1830s. So this is a man with much experience and definitely, perhaps was not ready for the marshalate during Napoleon's time, but definitely later on.
Desaix, Napoleon's close friend, killed at Marengo, aged 31.
Desaix is a close friend to Napoleon and Marshal Davout too. He is considered one of the most talented and able generals of the Revolutionary Wars, and this guy was a shoe-in for the marshalate had he not been killed at Marengo, which was the decisive victory of Napoleon's second Italian campaign. And what more can we say? Well, he was held in great esteem by Napoleon, and after his death, he built many monuments and honored Desaix in many ways. And some of it are still visible today. For example, many warships were named after Desaix.
Prince Eugène, Napoleon's adopted son, a hero of the Russian retreat.
Prince Eugène is Napoleon's stepson. It is Empress Josephine's son by another marriage. And he was the viceroy of Italy from 1805 onwards, and he faithfully executed Napoleon's will in Italy. Because, Napoleon actually never went back to Italy after his second Italian campaign, or after his coronation there, rather. And he proved to be a brave and able general. He distinguished himself particularly in the 1812 Russian campaign, where he led one of the major formations for the invasion. His heirs, his sons and daughters, would almost all become royalty through marriage. One of his sons will become Prince Consort of Portugal. 2 of his daughters, one will become the Empress of Brazil, the other of Queen of Sweden. And so, his progeny was also very distinguished and successful in life. And by the end of the Napoleonic Wars, he kept France's enemies dutifully at bay in Italy. Actually managed to win at the Mincio River against the Austrians. So definitely someone who deserved a marshal's baton after 1812.
Gerard, one of Napoleon's best corps commanders by 1814, made a marshal by King Louis Philippe in 1830.
Gerard is one of the best generals, and he was much better than most of the marshals, actually. He really came to his own later on during the Napoleonic Wars. What can we say about him? He was a long-time aide and subordinate to Marshal Bernadotte. He served as an aide-de-camp, then as his chief of staff, and continued to serve beside Bernadotte until Bernadotte became Crown Prince of Sweden, which we'll get into in the next part. He was commanding First Corps during the 1812 invasion. He served, commanded the division in First Corps. He then served in a division under Marshal MacDonald in 1813. And for the 1814 defense of France, he took command of Second Corps from Marshal Victor, who was fired by Napoleon. And like they said, he went on to become a marshal later on. Gerard is perhaps most famous for the fact that during the Battle of Waterloo, he was the one who urged Marshal Grouchy to march to the sound of the guns and help Napoleon. Alas, it was not to be.
Goudon, whose infantry division bore the brunt of the fighting at Auerstedt in 1806.
Goudon was one of the best divisional commanders serving under Marshal Davout from 1805 onward. He died at Smolensk, but in 2019 they actually found his casket and body, and in 2021 he was repatriated to France itself. And there's actually on YouTube a video on his repatriation where you can see the honorable and ceremonial reception Goudon received upon his return to France. It's really nice to see that they honored him, because he really was a hero, one of many, many thousands of heroes of the Napoleonic Wars.
Died of wounds near Smolensk in 1812. Junot, who first served with Napoleon at Toulon in 1793, probably committed suicide after his fall from favour in 1813.
Junot is probably the most known for leading the French invasion of Portugal in 1807. He continued to fight in the Peninsular War until 1811. For 1812, he took command of the Westphalian 8th Corps, but he failed to cut off the Russian retreat from Smolensk, and Napoleon was absolutely furious with him. He's known to have suffered from mental instability, and it really became bad in 1813. And that's probably why he committed suicide by throwing himself out of a window. Yeah, pretty sad tale. Junot was a very talented general, but at some point something changed in him, and people around him observed it, but we don't really know why or what happened. Some have attributed to head wounds he received earlier in his career, but that's just speculation.
Lasalle, the Hussar general, among the best light cavalry commanders of the Napoleonic Wars, killed at Wagram, aged 34.
Lasalle is one of the most colorful characters of the Napoleonic Wars. He is very similar to Murat in that he's very daring, he's adventurous, he's flamboyant. He led many legendary exploits both on the battlefield and off. It is said that he snuck into enemy camps at night to have fun with women. Served in both Italy and Egypt. He led the cavalry charge, or was one of the men leading a cavalry charge at Rivoli, for example. He covered a retreat at Battle of Aspen-Essling, but there he was killed shortly afterwards at the Battle of Wagram, leading a heroic charge as always. So definitely one of the best light cavalry commanders in the Napoleonic Wars.
Maison, who told his division on the morning of Leipzig that they must win that day or all be killed, made Marshal by King Charles X in 1829.
Maison is another one of those long-time aides-de-camps and chief of staffs to Marshal Bernadotte. He served beside him until 1808, and then he served in the Russian campaign. He took command of a brigade in Oudinot's 2nd Corps and fought at both battles of Polotsk. What more can we say? He also served in Marshal Ney's rearguard during the campaign, and then he fought in Larston's 5th Corps for the German campaign of 1813. And for the 1814 campaign, he was the one who was to defend Belgium and the port of Antwerp. And he was actually quite successful, despite being hugely numerically under strength compared to the Allies. Also made a marshal later on.
Nansouty, the heavy cavalry commander who died of wounds and exhaustion, aged 46.
Nansouty led the 1st Heavy Cavalry Division for a very long time, from 1804 to 1809, and then he was recalled for the 1812 campaign to take command of the 1st Cavalry Corps Reserve unit. And he led that with distinction during the campaign. For 1813 and 1814, he commanded the Imperial Guard Cavalry, and was very crucial, especially later on when the Guard Cavalry was not held back anymore. And he died before Napoleon could return to exile, so we don't know who he would have sided with.
Saint-Hilaire, hero of Austerlitz, died of wounds received at Aspern in 1809.
Saint-Hilaire was one of the best divisional commanders during the Napoleonic Wars, served in Marshal Soult's 4 Corps for the Battle of Austerlitz, where he distinguished himself, and he led many more engagements to the War of the 4th Coalition under Soult's command. He died at Battle of Aspern-Essling. I think his foot was blown off. Yeah. Tragic fate.
Vandamme, of whom Napoleon once said, "If I had to invade hell, I'd want him commanding the vanguard."
Vandamme is an extremely controversial character, and his relationship with Napoleon was unique, for lack of a better word. They both really despised each other, and they publicly criticized each other at every turn. Vandamme never approved of Napoleon's seizure of political power. He was always critical of the emperor, and the emperor was always critical of him. And Napoleon at one stage said that if he had 2 Vandammes, he would order the one to hang the other one. But he was very good in battle, and that's why he was kept on. Otherwise, he would have been terminated from his employment immediately. Served with distinction on multiple campaigns, was captured actually at the 1813 Battle of Kulm. He was dragged before the Emperor of Russia and basically told him he was accused of looting, and Vandamme responded with the fact that, well, at least I haven't killed my father. Not sure if that's true or not, but if it is, damn, the balls on this guy. For the Waterloo campaign, he actually served, he had command of 3rd Corps under Marshal Grouchy, but he was not part of the argument between Gerard and Grouchy about whether to march to Waterloo.
And now, Napoleon's 26 marshals, ranked in order of merit.
Yeah, I feel like I've talked too much about these minor generals when I should have been focusing on the marshals. Well, if you can always skip past this point. You don't need to listen to me rambling about people who are not really part of this video.
26. Marshal Pérignon. When Napoleon created the first 18 marshals, 4 were honorary marshals, recognized for past service to France.
Yeah, so before we get on, a little about Pérignon's background. Is minor aristocracy, minor nobility. His family only got a hereditary noble title in the beginning of the 18th century, although they were not very rich or aristocratic by the standards of the time. They were pretty well off, and they had local influence, and their family was not bad off. So very, how should I say it, plain background.
Pérignon was one of these. A former officer in the Royal Army, he'd won fame in the Revolutionary Wars, fighting the Spanish on the Pyrenees front.
Yes, Pérignon had a pretty lackluster military career before the Revolution, and he hadn't achieved much of anything, to be honest. But when the Revolution came, people rise in the ranks quickly. He actually had a more successful political career. Early on, he was actually elected to the Legislative Assembly in Paris in 1791, and in 1792 he enlisted to fight on the Pyrenees front, and that is the start of his career, really.
He later served as ambassador to Spain.
Oh yeah, we're really jumping quickly ahead here. Oh, let me fill in some of the gaps here. Pérignon served in the army of the Eastern Pyrenees, as it says right there. And, he distinguished himself, obviously, and was able to rise pretty damn quickly in the ranks. Became a general by 1793, and, he had no rank of this stature before. He has no experience commanding any sort of army. Still, credit must be given to Pérignon, because this campaign was particularly harsh, especially because of the guerrilla warfare that the Napoleon's armies would later experience. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the Napoleonic Wars series. What else can we say about Pérignon's campaign? He served with General Dugommier, who had been at the siege of Toulon in 1793. He also served together with Augereau and Victor, two future marshals. And yeah, what can we say? He was, he was not a brilliant man, a brilliant general by any means, and he didn't have any powerful political connections. And that makes it all the more strange that he was promoted so fast. What he had going for him was his well-educated background, and he was minor nobility, so...
After a brief retirement, he was sent to Italy and commanded the French left wing at the disastrous Battle of Novi.
Oh yeah, something about his tenure as ambassador to Spain. As a victorious general in Spain, he was of course appointed to be ambassador to Spain. He was actually a successful ambassador in many respects. His aristocratic background and his education made him well received at the Spanish court. And in this role, he actually managed to help negotiate. He played a very important role in the crafting of the Second Treaty of San Ildefonso, which basically allied Spain and France against Britain. And this was a major treaty, and it would last for quite a while actually, until Napoleon decided to just invade Spain. Yeah, but then after that stint as ambassador, he retired. He was then recalled to service, serving under General Joubert for the Battle of Novi, and he commanded one of the wings of the army alongside Marshal Grouchy. And he distinguished himself again here, rallying fleeing troops and commanding the retreat as best he could. But he was eventually captured, just like Grouchy, I believe.
Where the army was routed by Suvorov's Russians, and Pérignon was badly wounded and captured.
Now, Joubert, who died at this battle, and Pérignon and Grouchy, they shouldn't feel bad to losing to Suvorov. Suvorov was, or is, one of the most brilliant generals of all times. Certainly the best Russian general ever, in my opinion. He was, despite his advanced age at this point, he was just fantastic, majestic in every sense of the word. And he's probably, I think he's the last person in Russian history to be awarded the title of Generalissimo. Well, except Stalin. But, Stalin was not a military genius. He just got it because he was the highest ranking Soviet official. I digress. But yeah, they shouldn't feel bad to lose to him.
His appointment as honorary marshal in 1804 was a political move by Napoleon, a way to win acceptance for his new empire.
It was also a way to thank the army of the Eastern Pyrenees for their hard efforts during the Revolutionary War, and it also recognized Pérignon's role in that manner.
By emphasizing continuity with the revolution, by rewarding its military heroes.
Oh yeah. So these honorary marshals were often great Republican generals, Republican-era generals. And, they were perhaps not the greatest generals that existed in the new empire. But they had achieved important things in the past. And Napoleon was very keen on having this, emphasizing his empire as a continuity of the revolution rather than a break from the revolution. And whether that or not is the case or not has been debated by historians ever since.
Pérignon never held active command as a marshal, but served as governor of Parma, and later Naples.
Yeah, when he was governor of Naples, he really did not want to get in between Napoleon and King Joachim Murat, Marshal Murat. But it is maybe probable that he was sort of Napoleon's eyes and ears in Naples. If that's true or not, I don't know. It's not really confirmed. But he did not want anything to do with the personal feud between these two.
His eldest son, Pierre, was a cavalry officer, killed at Friedland in 1807. Pérignon retired in 1813, but refused to support Napoleon when he returned from exile in 1815 and was stripped of his marshal's baton. His rank was later restored by King Louis XVIII.
Yeah, Pérignon, to his credit, remained loyal to Napoleon until the end. But following the restoration, he swore new oaths, new vows to the monarchy and the king, and he intended to keep those words. He was bestowed many honors by King Louis XVIII. And yeah, it's not unusual at all. Many of these marshals threw in their lot with Napoleon, of course, but many of them remained loyal to the king. And, well, what more can we say about Pérignon? He voted for the death penalty of Marshal Ney during his trial, which is extremely unfortunate. And he sort of served as if the revolution... he served the revolution so well, but he served the new monarchy like the revolution had never happened. And then again, he never really liked the revolution, so, I guess that makes sense.
25. Marshal Brune.
Ah yes, Marshal Brune. He was justly proclaimed the savior of the Batavian Republic. By saving Holland, he also saved France from invasion. True.
Brune was another marshal whose appointment owed much to politics. As a fiery Republican and former close ally of revolutionary leader Georges Danton, his support was politically useful for Napoleon.
Yeah, so a little bit more about Brune's background. Like most of Napoleon's marshals, Brune came from a middle-class background with associations to the field of law. His father was a judge, and he wanted his son, of course, to have a similar career path within law, and he was sent to Paris to study law. However, once Brune got to Paris, he quickly spent his time drinking away and gambling. He became indebted, and he was forced to earn a living. And he became a reader and typesetter for a printing firm. And during this time, he took a liking to authorship, and he wrote prose and verse, and he fancied himself something of a poet. But eventually, he was able to gather enough money to open his own small printing press, where he launched a satirical daily newsletter called, I don't know, I lost the name, but anyways, it was a newsletter, and it was very patriotic, if you get my meaning. And thereby he, was something of a journalist, not the sort of modern journalist, investigating and all that, spreading news and all that. When the revolution broke out, Brune rallied to support it almost immediately. and he abandoned his journalist background in one fell swoop there. And he became a captain of the National Guard, and he was elevated to this rank not because he was, he didn't have a military background or anything, military training, but he was because he was very large. He was he had a great height and a martial bearing, which endeared him to his men. And he actually managed to form a close connection with George Danton, who we see here, who is one of the great revolutionary leaders. And he, as an ally to him, he was privy to most of the revolutionary plots and intrigues that led to the fall of the monarchy. And when Danton came to power, Brune followed with him, and he was promoted very quickly due to this connection.
Brune joined the army during the Terror, the most extreme period of the revolution. His political connections ensured rapid promotion, and he was sent to help put down a counter-revolutionary revolt in Bordeaux. In 1795, as a 30-year-old brigadier general, he helped Napoleon disperse a royalist mob in Paris with the famous whiff of grape shot.
Yes, Brune rose very rapidly, as we just said, and he put down this rebel federalist army at Bordeaux. He was also present during the Battle of Nervinden, fighting in the Army of the North under the command of General de Mourier, and he helped to rally troops there. And he distinguished himself at that battle. When Brune was actually close to getting executed when Robespierre and the others were purged from the government, or when Robespierre conducted the purge, I would say. And it was only through the support of Paul Barras, who is a very important figure, if you know anything about the revolution. And only through his influence and his own survival instincts was he able to survive until Robespierre was executed on the 9th of Thermidor. And his big moment, like Napoleon, was at the 13th of Vendemiaire, when he was subordinate to Napoleon and helped put down this royalist revolt in Paris. And thanks to this, Brune was allowed to follow Napoleon to Italy to serve under Marshal Massena, or General Massena at this point.
Brune then served with Napoleon in Italy, fighting in several of his famous early victories. He won a reputation as a fierce divisional commander and enthusiastic plunderer of Italian towns and churches.
Yeah, he hadn't really made any sort of name for himself militarily at this point when he got to Italy, but he proved himself during Napoleon's first Italian campaign. He proved to be pretty good, actually. Despite it all, he impressed both Massena and Napoleon. But like they said, he had problems with, looting a bit too much, perhaps.
In 1798, he commanded the French occupation of Switzerland, while extorting 200,000 francs from the wealthy Swiss communes, the equivalent of several $1 million today.
Yeah, so as always, the Directory at this point was cash-strapped. It was going bankrupt again. So how do we solve this? Well, we occupy Switzerland. Switzerland is a very rich country, it still is. And Brune secured about 14 million francs worth of assets to be sent to the Directory. And then he extorted 200,000 francs as a occupation expense, or whatever you want to call it. His personal, trouble. For his trouble, he had to get these 200,000 francs. And then he tried to emulate Napoleon by creating sister republics within Switzerland. And the director was not happy about that and sent him away.
It was said that Brune's personal carriage was so laden with gold when it left Switzerland that it immediately broke down. The next year he won his most important victory while commanding French forces in Holland, defeating an Anglo-Russian army at the Battle of Castricum and saving France from invasion.
Yeah, so before he was appointed in Holland, he actually briefly took command of the army of Italy to replace Marshal Berthier, General Berthier, who had to follow Napoleon to Egypt. In this role, he once again turned to his very extortionate methods, and he started meddling in the affairs of the Cisalpine Republic and changing its constitution and getting involved. And his chief of staff, Marshal Suchet, the future Marshal Suchet, called Brune, and I quote, one of the most shameless plunderers. And again, the Directory was pretty damn annoyed, sent him away, sent him to control the army station in Holland instead.
But a short, calamitous spell commanding the army of Italy convinced Napoleon that Brune was not fit for high command.
Yeah. So the Battle of Castricum was his, most important victory. The campaign in Holland was very messy and not very successful on the part of the First Coalition. But it ensured French control over the Belgium and the Netherlands for the foreseeable future. He defeated the Duke of York's British army at Castricum. Then he was sent back to Italy. Again, many problems emerged with Brune's handling of things. It turned into an utter disaster when he went back to Italy again. And yeah, do not keep Brune in high posts.
Instead, he sent him to be ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, where in 1804 he learned that he'd been made a marshal. But Brune's lack of delicacy, combined with a towering sense of self-importance, did not make him a successful diplomat.
Yeah, so Napoleon sent him to the Ottoman Empire as an ambassador, and he was to accomplish the very delicate and difficult task of restoring France's position in the Near East. And yeah, it did not go that well. I mean, he wasn't a total failure at start, but he was clearly not qualified for this delicate task. And when the Ottoman Empire refused to acknowledge Napoleon as Emperor of the French, Napoleon decided to recall Brune in protest. And this chapter sort of ended any hope of Brune getting any sort of high posting again.
He was recalled to France, but as governor of the Hanseatic ports, blundered again, drafting a treaty with Sweden that failed to make any mention of the French emperor. Whether a deliberate insult or act of incompetence, Napoleon was furious, and Brune was sacked. Brune spent the next 7 years at his country estate. He bitterly opposed the return of the Bourbon monarchy in 1814, and rallied to Napoleon when he returned from exile the next year.
Yeah, so Brune, after the failure as governor of the Hanseatic ports, just stayed at his country estate for 7 years. And when Napoleon returned to exile, he rallied to Napoleon's cause because the alternative, a royalist government once more, was just too terrible for a true Republican like him to accept. And he was appointed governor of Toulon in 1815, and he refused to surrender even after Napoleon's abdication. And when he was threatened with imprisonment, he finally just gave up. And then that's where the unfortunate thing happens.
But in the tumult following Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, Brune was cornered by a royalist mob in Avignon, murdered and tossed into the River Rhône.
So what happened here is that Brune was going to make his way back to Paris, and he decided to stop and rest at Avignon. But there he was mistakenly recognized as someone who had led a massacre there 20 years ago during the revolution. And he was pursued throughout town, and eventually the mob caught him writing a letter to his last letter to his wife. And then he was murdered and tossed into the River Rhone. A very ignominious end for Marshal Brune.
24. Marshal Serrurier.
He retained all the characteristics and severity of an infantry major, an honest man with integrity and reliability, but unfortunate as a general. Yeah, I don't know how unfortunate he was, but definitely a man with integrity and reliability.
Serrurier was another of the 4 honorary marshals whom Napoleon wished to recognize for past service. In contrast to Brune, Serrurier was a professional soldier of the old school, a veteran of the 7 Years' War, and a stern disciplinarian.
Yeah, again we have someone from the minor nobility, which allowed Serrurier to get commissioned into a militia at the tender age of 13. During the 7 Years' War, he served in Germany. He was actually sent on an expedition to Portugal, where he took part in the Siege of Almeida, 1762. Not the Siege of Almeida, 1811, during the Napoleonic Wars. Totally different siege.
This background was not necessarily an asset during the French Revolution, when any officer who'd served in the Royal Army was viewed with suspicion. But Colonel Serrurier's training and diligence were soon recognized as assets to the new French Republic.
Yeah, so within 34 years of service, at the outbreak of the revolution, Serrurier had I think it's quite impressive, he had achieved the rank of major by that point, and from this point onwards he's just gonna skyrocket in promotions, as most of these generals will do. Because what happens is that most of the aristocratic officers have already fled the country, and there's a gap to be filled by the revolutionary governments. Oh yeah, and it says he was stripped of his rank. The revolution was, of course, inherently a very suspicious movement, and anyone who had served in the old royal army or was a nobility like Serrurier was always regarded as politically suspect, and many people were stripped of their ranks in this manner, although most of them managed to get it back because people realized this law was untenable in the long run.
By 1795, he was a general serving with Napoleon in Italy, where his stand against corruption and looting won him the nickname the Virgin of Italy.
Yeah, so thanks to the influence of Paul Barras again, Serrurier managed to advance through the ranks quickly and was promoted General Division in 1795. And why? Well, people have recognized this guy was a pretty decent military administrator, and he had experience on the battlefield. And as such, he was wasted on the lower rungs of the officer grade. And he was sent to serve with the Army of Italy, where he would work together closely with Napoleon during the 96 campaign.
Serrurier was a reliable, if unspectacular, commander who won an important victory at Mondovi at a crucial moment in Napoleon's rise to fame.
The Battle of Mondovi was very important in the earliest phases of Napoleon's 1796 Italian campaign. This battle effectively allowed Napoleon to force Piedmont, Sardinia out of the war, and Nice and Savoie was ceded to the French Republic. And then he accepted, of course, as this... I'm talking too much. Then he accepted, of course, the the surrender at Mantua.
The following year, he accepted the Austrian surrender at the end of the long siege of Mantua. 2 years later, fighting under General Moreau's command, Serrurier and his division were cut off by the Russians and forced to surrender. Released on parole, he was back in Paris in time to support Napoleon's coup d'etat of 18 Brumaire.
Yeah, many of the generals that supported Napoleon during the coup of 18 Brumaire were well rewarded by Napoleon, and Serrurier, who had distinguished himself alongside Napoleon during the Italian campaign, was on the lists of marshals to be created.
Serrurier then retired from active command, but Napoleon, remembering his past service, made him an honorary marshal and governor of Les Invalides, the retirement home and hospital for old soldiers. There, shortly before the fall...
Oh, we really jumped from the creation of marshal to this. Of course, Serrurier did not do much during this time, so I understand, but some things to be mentioned is that besides being appointed a marshal and governor of Les Invalides, he was created a Count of the Empire and received other major honors. And, well, yeah. Then he dutifully served in that capacity until 1814, as all the standards were located in Les Invalides, and he was responsible for basically burning them.
Fall of Paris in 1814, Serrurier oversaw the burning of more than 1,000 captured flags and standards to prevent them falling into Allied hands. 23.
Some final notes on Serrurier. After the first restoration of the Bourbon dynasty, he was made a peer of France, but he rallied to Napoleon's side during the 100 Days, and as a result he lost his appointment as the governor of Les Invalides, which really hurt him. And he also lost his salary as a marshal, and that was only restored a few months before his death. And he was involved in the trial of Marshals Lannes and surprisingly voted for his execution, though I don't think he had much of a choice considering he had sided with Napoleon during the 100 Days. And yeah, what can we say about Serrurier? He was by no means a brilliant commander, but he did achieve a successful military career thanks to being very reliable, and he had unshakable integrity. He never looted and pillaged and always treated his men fairly, treated civilian populations fairly. All in all, Serrurier was a good man.
3. Marshal Kellerman.
I think I was probably the boldest general who ever lived, but even I wouldn't have dared to take post there, Napoleon on Kellerman's command post at the Battle of Valmy. Yeah, Valmy was an interesting battle, if you can even call it that. But yeah, Kellerman, another impressive figure.
Kellerman was another honorary marshal, the oldest at 68, and famed throughout France as the saviour of the revolution. A career soldier from a middle-class background, he'd seen distinguished service as a cavalry officer in the 7 Years' War.
Now, Kellerman, I think, is, among all of the marshals in this video, probably the most impressive. Kellerman is from a middle-class background, and he's born in the city of Strasbourg. And Strasbourg at that time was only recently annexed, about 50 years at that time when he was born. And so it was a very German-speaking region. It was a German-speaking town or city. It was a free city of the Holy Roman Empire once. And yeah, considering this, his low social status, and the fact that he was, for all intents and purposes, a foreigner when he enlisted in the French army, his career advancement during the pre-revolution era is quite impressive. During the 7 Years' War, he served as a cavalry officer. He led irregular forces many times, and he waged a war on outposts, as was so common during the 7 Years' War. And he received many a promotion during the 7 Years' War and afterwards. And by the time the revolution started, Kellerman had reached most of the way to becoming a marshal. I think he was a brigadier general when the revolution started. And he is the only one of Napoleon's marshals to have achieved senior military rank before the outbreak of the revolution. So, despite the fact that he served the Ancien Regime, despite his social status and his foreign status, really, he made it all the way to the top. And he was practically already a marshal in 1789. A remarkable story. I urge you guys to look into that more. Really an extremely impressive career from someone who shouldn't have been able to advance this far.
At the beginning of the Revolutionary Wars, he was a general, commanding a frontier army at the moment of greatest crisis, when it seemed foreign invasion was about to stamp out the revolution and restore the Ancien Regime. But at Valmy, in September 1792, Kellerman's Army of the Centre stood its ground, and with a ferocious artillery barrage, persuaded the Prussian army to withdraw.
Yeah, so Kellerman had a lot of experience before the revolution in raising, organizing, and leading irregular recruits, which there were a lot of during the revolution. And he already knew how to navigate an unfavorable political and social landscape to rise in rank. And thus Kellerman was able to excel and profit himself under whatever regime he served. And when the revolution broke out, Kellerman fully embraced it. Considering his low social status, it's not surprising at all. And he was able to use his experience to organize and train a formidable army of 20,000 men, which was much better than anything else France had at this point. Now, the trick here for Kellerman is to use the old soldiers that had served in the Royal Army. So at Valmy, most of his infantry and cavalry squadrons were experienced men who had served previously. And he had mixed in these interspersed volunteer battalions of the revolution, so the lines would be more stable. And, most of the recruits was actually held back. And it wasn't really a battle, Valmy. It was, like I said, when the Duke of Brunswick led his Prussian army in, he didn't encounter any serious opposition. But when he finally encountered an army that was ready to give a battle, he decided to spare his men and march back. Nevertheless, impressive by Kellerman.
Valmy was not a stunning tactical victory, but it was a turning point of history that saved the infant French Republic.
I should also mention he was assisted by one General Berthier in organizing his new army. So no wonder it turned out well. He had Berthier as an assistant.
When the revolution took a more radical turn, even a war hero like Kellerman became suspected of royalist links and spent a year in prison under the threat of the guillotine.
Now why? Well, it's funny. Kellerman was put on suspicion because he had used troops from the old Royal Army rather than relying on the volunteer battalions of the revolution. And that's pretty much the reason why he was arrested and imprisoned. And he was only saved from execution by the fact that his trial was rescheduled all the time. And so he was able to survive until Robespierre fell.
Acquitted and restored to command, he was poised to launch a new offensive in Italy when he was sidelined, first by General Scherer, then in favour of a rising new talent, General Bonaparte. Kellerman later specialised in army administration and training, a role he continued to perform under Napoleon.
Yeah, 1798, he had held commands before. In 1797 he held the post of Commander-in-Chief of the Army of the Alps and Italy. And then he was restricted to just command the Army of the Alps, and then the Army of the Alps was disbanded. So he was out of a job. He was then appointed Inspector General of Cavalry. And this is a role which was wholly suited for him, considering his long background in cavalry and cavalry warfare. And this is where his organizational skills could be taken advantage of.
Whilst also entering politics and serving as President of the Senate. His son, General François-Étienne Kellerman, followed in his father's footsteps, serving as one of Napoleon's best cavalry commanders.
Well, we're ending it right there. All right, let me fill in something about Kellerman's efforts during the Napoleonic Wars. He continued to work on the cavalry with Napoleon during the Napoleonic Wars, of course, like they said. He also continually was called upon to command reserve armies. So during the Austerlitz campaign, he took command of 3rd Corps of the Reserve on the Rhine. When Napoleon was in Prussia in 1806, Kellerman was drilling National Guards troops. In 1808, Napoleon bestowed on him the title of Duke of Valmy, which was a victory title. It doesn't come with any land or anything like that. It was very common in this era to have victory titles. And in 1808, he also commanded the Army of the Reserve of Spain. In 1809, he commanded the Reserve Army on the Rhine again. In 1812, he supervised the National Guard again. In 1813, he took command of the Reserve Army of the Rhine for the 3rd time. And for Napoleon's final campaign of 1814, Kellerman was in the rear, sending Napoleon reinforcements. And so, I think it should be mentioned that even these rear guard duties there weren't much action in them. They were still important, and they needed to be filled by a competent organizational leader. Kellerman certainly was that. And I think he was underused by Napoleon. He could have been used much more in a more active role. I think he was capable of it. During the 100 Days, Kellerman kept his distance from Napoleon wisely, and he was made a peer of France following the abdication. And he helped reorganize the Royal Army too. But at that point, he was in his 80s. So what can we say about Kellerman to close out his chapter here? Kellerman was a man of supreme organizational ability. He was a born survivor, and he had a great great eye for detail and organization, like I said. And although his fame on the battlefield is primarily from Valmy, it was, like I said, nevertheless a turning point in history. So even though that was his one shining moment, it was one of the greatest shining moments of the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars.
22.
Ah, yes,
Marshal
Grouchy.
Grouchy.
Oh, there's lots to be said about Grouchy. But let's read a quote here. His conduct was as unforeseeable as if his army on the march had been struck by an earthquake and swallowed up Napoleon on Grouchy's failure to march to his aid during the Battle of Waterloo. Yeah.
When Napoleon returned from his first exile in 1815, he created one last marshal for the upcoming campaign, Emmanuel de Grouchy. Although now infamous for failing to march to Napoleon's aid during the Battle of Waterloo, up to that moment, Grouchy had had a long and distinguished military career.
Grouchy's background is very interesting. He is the only one of Napoleon's marshals that come from real nobility. His father was the Marquis de Grouchy, and being a marquis was it was quite high up on the noble social ladder, if you want to call it that. And so he was always destined for a military career as the son of high nobility. In France, there were divisions of nobility. There were the nobles of the robes, who could basically buy their way into nobility and get nobility by serving in important royal offices. And then there were the nobles of the sword, who passed on their titles, and these were the great noble houses dating back hundreds of years. And so let's see what they have to say about Grouchy.
An aristocrat who embraced the French Revolution, Grouchy served with distinction throughout the Revolutionary Wars, fighting counter-revolutionaries in the Vendée and serving in Italy, where he was wounded and captured at the Battle of Novi. Under the...
Oh yeah, we just jumped again. There's a lot to cover with Grouchy. Yeah, actually he started as an artillery officer. That didn't last long though. He was quickly transferred to the cavalry, and he served in the King's Life Guards regiment. And then he left the army in 1787, actually. And yeah, then he returned upon the outbreak of the revolution, serving once again in the cavalry. And he served with General Hoche in the Vendée, which was a very messy business. And he was eventually made chief of staff and second in command of General Hoche. And Hoche would prove to be a patron of Grouchy's during the revolution. Eventually he transferred to the Army of Italy in 1798 under Joubert's command, and that's where he fought at the Battle of Novi, commanding one of the wings alongside Pérignon. And he was also wounded during this combat and taken prisoner. A very unfortunate battle for the French.
Empire, Grouchy excelled as commander of a dragoon division in Marshal Murat's cavalry reserve.
Now, despite Grouchy being most known as a cavalry general, he actually had significant experience commanding infantry, even entire divisions, actually. So he was by no means just a cavalry general, though that's what the role he was, most famous for. Yeah, what can we say about Grouchy before the Empire? He served under Moreau in Germany. He stuck up for Moreau when Napoleon had him exiled. Didn't do him wonders for his military career. He fought at Hohenlinden then, and he was made Inspector General of Cavalry in 1801. And then he became quite close with Murat. And during the Austerlitz campaign, he was in an infantry division in General Marmont's Second Corps. And then he was placed on a sick list and did not return until 1806, where he again served in Murat's cavalry reserve and distinguished himself.
He was praised by the Emperor for his part in the Great French Charge at Eylau, played an important role buying time for Napoleon at Friedland, and expertly covered the French right wing at Wagram. For the invasion of Russia, he commanded 3rd Cavalry Corps.
Yeah, after Wagram, he asked Napoleon if he could, take a break. He had campaigned relentlessly for 10 years at that point, and he was granted this semi-active status. Then he returned to serve in the Russian campaign, taking command of the 3rd Reserve Cavalry Corps, and he led it with distinction.
And was wounded at Borodino. He survived the horrors of the retreat, but was left so exhausted it took him several months to recover.
Interesting here, during the final parts of the retreat, Grouchy formed a sort of ad hoc cavalry unit consisting entirely of officers, because those are basically the only men left at this point, and they called it the Sacred Squadron, and it was a cavalry bodyguard unit for Napoleon. And this was about 500 to 600 men, depending on the source, and yeah, they successfully managed to escort Napoleon out of Russia. Just, you know, good on him. And then the unit was disbanded, of course. And then for the 1813 campaign, he felt like his health no longer allowed him to serve as a cavalry commander. And he asked Napoleon if he could be given an infantry division, which Napoleon said no to. And as such, he asked to be retired, which Napoleon also granted. But he would come back.
He returned for Napoleon's 1814 campaign in France, and was wounded twice more.
Grouchy performed brilliantly during the 1814 campaign, especially at the Battle of Vauchamps, where he just chased down Blucher's Prussian troops. And he served at Craonne, where he was wounded. And he also served at Troyes. So, you know, he was everywhere with Napoleon during this 1814 campaign.
Grouchy was made a marshal at the start of the 100 Days campaign, and commanded Napoleon's right wing at Ligny.
Grouchy's decision to rally to Napoleon's side is interesting, considering the fact that Grouchy had long been dissatisfied with Napoleon, because he felt like he deserved a marshal's baton way earlier in his career. And despite these disagreements, Grouchy rallied to Napoleon's side and was made a marshal finally in 1815.
After the battle was won, he was ordered to pursue the retreating Prussians to prevent them joining up with Wellington's Anglo-Allied army. 2 days later, as the Battle of Waterloo raged 10 miles to the west, Grouchy made the fateful decision to follow his written orders rather than march to join Napoleon, and has been widely blamed for the French Emperor's defeat ever since. Grouchy's vilification is not wholly fair, not least because Napoleon rarely encouraged his marshals to show initiative, and often flew into rages if they deviated from his written orders.
Yeah, this is a ignominious chapter for Grouchy. It basically ruined his reputation for all time to come. And historians back then accepted Napoleon's version of events uncritically. But when we start to dig into this matter and look at it closely, this post facto vilification of Grouchy is not fair at all. Napoleon is misdirecting blame, where in fact most of it lay on Napoleon's himself. It was Napoleon that had ordered him to pursue the Prussians in this matter. It was a wild goose chase. He followed his orders, Grouchy. And yeah, it's basically Napoleon's fault. However, Grouchy is not blameless. General Gerard confronted Grouchy, said that we should march to the sound of the guns, we should help out Napoleon immediately. Nope, Grouchy would not move. And yeah, it seems in this instance he was more afraid of the consequences of breaking Napoleon's orders than actually doing what he probably instinctively knew what was the best option, and that was to march to Waterloo. Yeah.
Nor should one blunder obscure the distinguished record of one of the Grande Armée's best cavalry generals. Grouchy fled to America after Napoleon's defeat to escape royalist reprisals, but was pardoned and returned to France in 1820.
Yeah, when he came back to France in 1819, he was demoted to the rank of Lieutenant General, and then he was formally retired in 1820. But when the July Revolution came around, Grouchy was restored to his former honors by King Louis Philippe, and in 1831 he was restored as a Marshal of France again. And then he was elevated to sit in the Chamber of Peers in 1832. And Grouchy finally died in 1847, just missing the creation of the Second Empire, which would have been ironic if he was still around at that point.
21. Marshal Moncey.
He was an honest man. Now, of all the guys among the entire marshalate, really, Moncey is probably the most pure-hearted and honest guy around. He was really... we'll get into it.
Moncey ran away from home to join the army at the age of 15. After 20 years of uneventful service, he'd risen no higher than the rank of captain. But then came the French Revolution. Most French officers were aristocrats, who, if they did not actively oppose the revolution, were nevertheless regarded as politically suspect. The result was that 3/4 of them either fled the country or were dismissed from the army. Moncey, a middle-class officer with no strong political views, reaped the benefit with meteoric promotion.
Oh yeah. Moncey's rise is even more remarkable than most people of this era, which is saying something considering how many people rose so quickly. And he was a captain, which is a relatively low-ranking officer, and that's to be expected. I mean, he had a middle-class background, and so he could not expect to rise in the ranks as nobility could in the Ancien Regime. But now, it's about to explode.
By 1794, General Moncey was leading the army of the Western Pyrenees to victory over the Spanish.
Yeah, he was sent to fight in the army of the Western Pyrenees. There he quickly became a major, and then he became a brigadier general, and then he became a general division, almost all at once. Yeah. And as the commander of the army of the Western Pyrenees, he was, quite successful. He really shouldn't have gotten this command, considering he lacked so much seniority. There were other guys in line to take command of this army. It was a backwater of the Revolutionary Wars, not very important, to be honest, in the grand scheme of things. But regardless, it was a harsh campaign. This was undoubtedly the most successful part of his military career. Now, this is helped by the fact that the Spanish were pretty damn incompetent, and they would remain incompetent throughout the Napoleonic Wars and the Revolutionary Wars. Yeah.
On what was, admittedly, a relative backwater of the Revolutionary Wars. In 1797, he was dismissed for alleged royalist sympathies.
Yeah. The coup of 18 Fructidor precedes the more famous coup of 18 Brumaire. 18 Fructidor was basically a purge of royalist politicians that were threatening to bring back the monarchy. And he was suspected to have royalist ties, and as such he was dismissed from the army.
But reinstated in time to support Napoleon's coup of 18 Brumaire.
His role in the coup of 18 Brumaire is not known, but we did know he ardently supported the coup. And we know that he was rewarded for this support by Napoleon.
By his own admission, Moncey was a sensitive officer. Honest, honourable, but lacking a ruthless streak or iron will to succeed. Napoleon was aware of his limitations as a general, but made him a marshal in 1804 as part of his emphasis on continuity between the Republic and his new empire. Moncey was appointed Inspector General of the Gendarmerie, France's militarized police force, and spent most of the rest of his career commanding reserve troops.
In the interim there, one of the rewards for helping Napoleon, or supporting the coup of 18 Brumaire, was to be placed under General Moreau's command in the Army of the Rhine. And then he was sent to hold Switzerland with 15,000 troops. And then he commanded the Army of the Reserve to cross the Alps and join General MacDonald's forces in Italy. And then he served with Brune's Italian army, and he was actually deceived by an Austrian commander that a ceasefire had been signed when it hadn't. And Brune wanted him dismissed from the Army of Italy, but Brune instead was dismissed himself. And Moncey actually briefly took command of the Army of Italy from that point onwards. He then was offered to serve under Murat in Naples. He said no to that and went back home. Then he became the Inspector General of the Gendarmerie. And yeah, that just fills in the gap a bit.
He only held one field command again. In light of his victorious record against the Spanish, he was given command of a corps for the 1808 invasion of Spain, operating in the south of the country with mixed success.
Yeah, even though there were some setbacks here for Moncey during the Spanish campaign, Napoleon didn't seem to hold him responsible. In fact, he gave him the title of Duke of Conegliano, I think it's pronounced that way, in July 1808. So yeah.
In 1809, he was replaced by General Junot and returned to France.
Yeah, it seems he was dismissed not because of any problems on the battlefield or his performance in Spain particularly. It seems it was due to the fact that during the siege of Zaragoza, he offered Spanish commander very generous terms if he surrendered, and he also conducted the war in a very humane way, and he did not approve really of what the other French commanders were doing in Spain. And this is what I mean, he's a very honest man, he sticks up for his convictions, but it was not liked by Napoleon or nor other commanders. And such, he was dismissed. And then he served in the Army of Flanders in 1809. It was a rear appointment. He was then made Inspector General of the National Guard in 1812. He commanded the Reserve Army of the Pyrenees in 1813. And finally, he was made Major General of the Parisian National Guard in 1814. This command was also intended to be a rear appointment. However, it became very much a frontline appointment, an active command, when the coalition army showed up outside of Paris. During the Battle of Paris, he heroically led the National Guard in the defense of the capital, and he was one of the marshals who confronted Napoleon with the reality of his situation at the Tuileries Palace after the fall of Paris. And this was really his finest moment. It was. He fought heroically, but defeat was inevitable.
Moncey's finest hour came in the dying days of the Empire, leading the National Guard of Paris in a courageous but doomed defense of the French capital. In 1815, the restored King of France, Louis XVIII, ordered Marshal Moncey to preside at the trial of Marshal Ney for treason. Moncey regarded Ney as a hero for having saved so many French lives in Russia, and refused, declaring, "If I am not allowed to save my country nor my own life, then at least I will save my honor."
Yeah, so this is another example of Grouchy standing up for his convictions and standing up for his colleagues. and comrades. And it's a really rare sort of character among the marshals. Someone with this much pride, honor, and conviction, and always stuck by them regardless of what happened around him, which undoubtedly hurt his career very much. An interesting bit of trivia, since at this point Marshal Berthier and Marshal Murat are dead, Moncey is the most senior member of the Marshalate alive at this point. But yeah, Moncey refused to pass conviction on Marshal Ney during his court-martial, and actually the court-martial proved itself incapable of passing judgment.
After a short spell in prison, Moncey was allowed to resume his military career, becoming governor of Les Invalides, in which role he presided over the repatriation of Napoleon's remains from St. Helena.
Actually, while Moncey didn't do much militarily during this period, in 1823 he was sent by the king to intervene in the Spanish Civil War, and he actually defeated the former Spanish guerrilla leader Esposimina and captured Barcelona during this period, which is quite interesting. And in 1833 he was appointed governor of Les Invalides by King Louis Philippe, and in this role he, like he just said, presided over the repatriation of Napoleon's remains from St. Helena, the so-called La Tour de Cendre, the return of the ashes, literally. That is an interesting chapter in the July monarchy that we could talk forever about. It's a very interesting topic itself, the repatriation of Napoleon's remains, and how very political it was to bring back Napoleon to France, even at this point, and it's been 20 years since he's died, so
In 1840. At the end of the ceremony, the 86-year-old Marshal Moncey announced, "And now, let us go home to die."
He actually requested to be buried in the Isle of the Brave, very close to Napoleon's tomb, and that request was granted. Very fitting for a man of Moncey. Now, Moncey was never a great general, as I said, but his courage and convictions from Spain, fighting in Spain early on, to the fall of Paris in 1814 is quite undeniable. He had a moral courage few other marshals had, and he refused to wage war in a way that was seen as dishonorable, ruthless by his contemporaries. He refused to participate in the trial against Marshal Ney, and the fact that he survived it all, despite being this obstinate in sticking to his convictions, proves that his personal sense of honor really struck a chord with others. Napoleon said he was an honest man, but it was Moncey's great misfortune that others were not as honest towards him. And that's the sad part here.
20. Marshal Poniatowski.
A man of noble character, brimming over with honor and bravery.
Prince Józef Poniatowski was the King of Poland's nephew, but his military career began as a cavalry officer in the Austrian army, even serving as aide-de-camp to Emperor Józef II himself.
Yeah, Poniatowski was born to a brother to the King of Poland, and he was actually in Austrian service, which is why Poniatowski was born in Vienna, and this is why he came into service with the Austrian emperor rather than the Polish one. Now, he received a education and upbringing by his uncle, King Stanislaus Augustus, so he was raised from an early age to to be a man who would play an important role in the Kingdom of Poland, Lithuania in the future.
In 1789, he transferred to the Polish army with the rank of Major General, but could not save Poland from partition by its rapacious neighbours, Russia, Prussia, and Austria.
When Poniatowski returned to Poland, he was actually very torn because he had a sense of duty and loyalty to Emperor Joseph II, and he actually had had him release him from his vows to Austrian service so that he could serve an even greater cause, of course, Poland, his home country, and that's where his uncle ruled. And unfortunately for Poniatowski, he was given the rank of Major General, despite having little experience, or actually no experience, in commanding that many troops. Poland was mobilizing for an inevitable war with Russia, and they were lacking many officers, and as such, Poniatowski had to assume command. And when Poland promulgated a new modern constitution in 1791, Empress Catherine could not abide that and invaded Poland. At that time, Poniatowski was commanding maybe 20,000 troops. They had no supplies, no training, no weapons, no nothing. And he was unsuccessful in fighting off the Russians. The greatest strategic situation was just hopeless for Poland at this point, and he had definitely no staff to help him overcome all of these shortages. So yeah, a pretty terrible start for Poniatowski.
By 1795, Poland had vanished from the map, swallowed up by its rivals. After Napoleon's defeat of Prussia in 1806, Poniatowski decided loyal service to the French Emperor was the best way to win Poland's restoration.
Yeah, after Poland was wiped out from the map, Poniatowski lived in exile in both Brussels and Vienna. Then he returned to Poland, and he lived as a landed nobleman. And the King of Prussia and the Tsar of Russia both tried to win him over with various appointments and showering him with titles, but he resisted all of their efforts. And then Napoleon came around, and that's when he saw his opportunity to win Poland's full restoration as an independent nation.
Although he never fully trusted Napoleon's aims. Somber, serious, and brave, Poniatowski proved an able commander of Duchy of Warsaw forces in Napoleon's service.
And he was a great organizer too. He really built the army of the Grand Duchy of Warsaw out of nothing. He had no money and no nothing, but he managed to build a very substantial force for Napoleon. And he really did miracles. And actually, he won over Murat quite early on, but Napoleon and Davout were very skeptical of this man, who they felt was of little talent and of little value. But they would change their mind big time about Poniatowski.
When war broke out with Austria in 1809, while Napoleon advanced on Vienna, Poniatowski waged a brilliant supporting campaign against a larger Austrian army in Galicia.
Yep, and he actually, during this campaign, it didn't start off too well, but he actually managed to turn it around, and he, in the process, doubled the territory of the Grand Duchy of Warsaw. Very impressive supporting campaign.
For the invasion of Russia, he commanded the Polish 5th Corps. He and his troops distinguished themselves first at Smolensk and again at Borodino, leading the attack on the right wing.
Poniatowski raised 30,000 men for the effort in Russia. He was very enthusiastic about it, as were his troops, and their performance at various encounters with the Russian army were always great, because they were very motivated, as you can imagine.
Poniatowski and his corps performed heroically throughout the campaign, motivated in part by their old animosity towards Russia. But by the end of the retreat, 5th Corps had been virtually destroyed. Poniatowski remained loyal to Napoleon, even though the disaster in Russia paved the way for the Russian reoccupation of Poland.
Yeah, so after this battle, and Poniatowski considered, after this campaign, Poniatowski considered committing suicide. But he decided that he must fight on, even if politically the hope of winning Poland's restoration was pretty lost and he knew it. So he gathered about 8,000 loyal Polish troops and went back to Napoleon's service during the German campaign of 1813, and was the Polish 8th Corps was created under Poniatowski's command.
He rejoined Napoleon in Germany in 1813.
Napoleon was actually very surprised that Poniatowski went back to his service, and I can understand why. Napoleon had never trusted Poniatowski, and Poniatowski had never trusted Napoleon. And it was actually during the interlude there in 1810 to 1812, Poniatowski was promised a great autonomous Grand Duchy, similar to what Russia had done to Finland. And he was promised great autonomy. He was going to govern this new kingdom of Poland on behalf of the Russian Tsar. And Poniatowski didn't accept this offer, of course, but he relayed this information to Napoleon. And he told him, well, the Russians are offering all this great autonomy, and, I'm gonna rule this kingdom of Poland. And, it would be a shame if I did that. And he basically used this information to extort Napoleon to give him more supplies and money for the Polish army. It's actually quite brilliant.
And was given command of the Polish 8th Corps. On the eve of the Battle of Leipzig, he was made a marshal by Napoleon in recognition of his service and to inspire his Polish troops. Poniatowski was the only non-Frenchman to receive this honor.
Very impressive that he managed to receive it as a full foreigner, even though Kellerman was half foreigner, even though he's technically French. And this speaks volumes about Poniatowski's ability and his loyalty to Napoleon.
He and his troops fought with their usual tenacity and skill at Leipzig, holding key villages on the southern front against the Austrian and Prussian onslaught. At the end of the battle, Poniatowski commanded part of the rearguard. But their only escape route, a bridge over the Elster River, was blown up too soon. Badly wounded, Poniatowski tried to escape by riding his horse across the river, but he was swept from his saddle and drowned. He had been a marshal for just 4 days.
Yeah, his death was much admired and much regretted by friends and foes alike, and his death signified the end of the dream of Polish independence for the next century at least. But his memory lived on, and what can we say? He did not really esteem himself to the marshal's baton that he was given to by Napoleon, for to him it represented an attempt by Napoleon to buy his loyalty that was already there, and his conduct on the battlefield and off the battlefield was always determined by personal honor. It was not influenced by these cynical and empty and superfluous gestures that Napoleon always loved to dabble in.
In the short term, Poniatowski's loyalty to France achieved nothing, as following Napoleon's defeat, Russia occupied Poland for the next century. But Poniatowski's legend lived on, a model of Polish patriotism that inspired future generations. Marshal Jourdan.
I certainly used that man very ill. Jourdan is a true patriot, and that is the answer to many things that have been said about him.
As a young French private, Jourdan saw combat in Georgia during the American Revolutionary War.
Yeah, and he didn't actually see much experience. He didn't experience much active service during the American Revolutionary War, except during the siege of Savannah, which was a complete and utter disaster. You can look it up. It was not pretty. And then, yeah, he was. The French forces were forced to retreat back to the Caribbean.
But he then caught a fever that led to his discharge and plagued him for the rest of his life.
Yeah, and it is one of the great disadvantages that Jourdan had that no other marshal had, and it was the fact that he suffered from these intermittent bouts of sicknesses, and it would really hamper his career, even though he made it all the way to the marshalate.
When the French Revolution began, he was elected captain of his local National Guard unit, fought at the battles of Jemappes and Honschouten, and was rapidly promoted to general. In 1794...
Yeah, Jourdan is also unique, because he's the only marshal that had learned high command on the job. He went from nothing, I mean nothing, to becoming a general of division, and he had no idea what he was doing, or he shouldn't have, at any rate. But yeah, despite this, Jourdan proved capable of handling high command.
He made his name defeating coalition forces at the Battle of Fleurus. This was a crucial victory of the Revolutionary War, which handed France control of Belgium for 20 years.
So yeah, the Battle of Fleurus is a very important victory that handed the French control of Belgium. And yeah, it was a battle that Jourdan fought stubbornly. He was on the defensive for most of the battle. And it was an important victory in the Revolutionary Wars, but in actuality, much of the credit must be given to the future Marshal Lefebvre, who also was fighting at this battle, and he held his ground here. And this battlefield was very close to the battlefield of Charleroi, where Marshal Ney would command one of the wings of Napoleon's army for the Waterloo campaign. And yeah.
It was also notable for the French army's use of balloon reconnaissance, the first effective use of an aircraft in military history.
Yeah, I don't want to get into it here, but Napoleon discarded with the use of balloons during the Napoleonic Wars. Perhaps it was a bit too impractical at the time to drag those things with you, I don't know.
Jourdan became a prominent politician under the Directory, lending his name to a law that formalized France's policy of mass conscription.
Yes, Jourdan was elected to the Council of 500. He was actually elected as the president of the Council of 500, and lent his name to Louis Jourdan, which is the mass conscription law that Napoleon would use very, very thoroughly throughout the Napoleonic Wars.
As a committed Republican, Jourdan refused to support Napoleon's coup of 18 Brumaire.
Jourdan had very different ideas about what needed to be done. He was certainly not adverse against getting rid of the Directory. However, he wanted to expand and widen the scope of government. He didn't want to narrow it and concentrate power like Napoleon wanted to. But despite this, he was able to be made a marshal, and this is the fact that he is the victor of Fleurus after all.
But his fame as the victor of Fleurus was enough to ensure he became a marshal in 1804. Jourdan was on good terms with Napoleon's elder brother, Joseph. When Joseph became king of Spain in 18...
Yeah, so Joseph and Jourdan first came into contact, really, when Jourdan was appointed governor of Naples in 1806. And there he quickly formed a friendship, actually, with Joseph. And one of the terms Joseph had for becoming king of Spain was that Jourdan would come with him as his chief of staff. It was granted.
In 1808, Jourdan went with him as his military advisor. But the situation in Spain would prove beyond Jourdan's military skills to solve. He faced stubborn resistance from the Spanish and Portuguese, supported by the British, and an equally stubborn refusal to cooperate from other French marshals in Spain, theoretically under Jourdan's command, but who repeatedly ignored his orders and openly questioned his competence.
Yes, this was an ongoing problem here. Jourdan actually had a greater strategic insight than most of these gentlemen on display here. He realized that the French were overstretching themselves constantly during this campaign, and he wanted to pull back and concentrate his forces, but he was overruled by Napoleon, and then he was ignored by his subordinates. And as such, Jourdan was not in a position to do much of anything to solve the situation in Spain. He certainly did try, but Soult and Marmont didn't even bother to respond to Jourdan's commands. Suchet responded, but he didn't care. He just paid lip service. Victor ignored his battlefield orders at Talavera, so it was a hopeless situation for Jourdan and Joseph. And he simply did not have the authority or have the respect among his colleagues in order to accomplish his mission.
Marshal Soult in Andalusia was a prime offender, while Marshal Victor's insubordination at the Battle of Talavera contributed directly to the French defeat.
And not only that, he had been handed this master plan by Napoleon on how the conquest of Spain and Portugal would be conducted. And it was an unrealistic plan that Jourdan did not actually believe in. And so he was forced to implement this thing he didn't actually think was going to work.
Struck by another bout of ill health, Jourdan went home to recover. 2 years later, he returned to Spain. But at the Battle of Vittoria...
Yeah, so when Napoleon turned his eye towards Russia and the Russian campaign there, he gave supreme command over Spanish military affairs to Jourdan and Joseph. But he failed to communicate this to other marshals in Spain. And as such, this authority, ostensibly granted by Napoleon, was useless. And the situation remained as bad as it has always been. Although the situation helped when Marmont got seriously wounded at Salamanca and when Soult was recalled in 1813 for the German campaign. But by that point, it was too late. When Jourdan actually warned against that Wellington might take the offensive in 1813, but was ignored by Napoleon, who said that Wellington was too passive of commander, basically. He wouldn't dare attack. He doesn't have the supply lines, of yada yada. As always, with Napoleon's long-range Spanish interventions, they were completely useless and unhelpful. And this led to the Battle of Vittoria, in which Jourdan and Joseph were unable to hold back Wellington's army, and that meant the end of the Bonapartist Kingdom of Spain.
In 1813, he and King Joseph were outmaneuvered and decisively beaten by Wellington, leading to the collapse of the Bonapartist Kingdom of Spain. Jourdan never held a major command again, but his 20 years of service and evident patriotism were widely recognized and respected.
Yeah, so he was recalled in 1814 with the command of a military district. A minor role, of course, but still, someone had to do it. And after that, during the Restoration, he swore loyalty to King Louis XVIII and was made a Chevalier of St. Louis. And during the 100 Days, he served as a commander of the same military district. But after the defeat at Vittoria, his pay was severely reduced, and he was made a scapegoat for this whole disaster in Spain, which is extremely unfair to Jourdan, who really tried to do his best, and he had good ideas about what could be done in Spain, but was never allowed to implement any of it. Anyways, he took no part really in the 100 Days. He just sat there on his military district. He got his payback from Napoleon, though. Always something. Following this second restoration, he was made a count. And he was still in active service when the July Revolution happened. And King Louis-Philippe made him governor of Les Invalides.
He was made a peer by Napoleon, a count by Louis XVIII, and died in 1833 while serving as governor of Les Invalides.
Yeah. What can be said about Jourdan? Final judgment here. Jourdan was a capable, rather than a great general. He was always an honest man, sort of like Moncey, really. He served France loyally, no matter who ruled it. He was hampered by his poor health and his naive beliefs in the virtues of republicanism. Let's be honest here, sticking to his republican beliefs didn't really help him. And yeah, his reputation was slandered during the revolution, even after the revolution. And yeah, this gave him an unfair reputation of being an amateur bungler, which he was not. And finally, though, on St. Helena, Napoleon himself acknowledged that he had not taken full advantage of Jourdan's abilities.
Pérignon, Brune, Serrurier, Kellerman, Grouchy, Moncey, Poniatowski, Jourdan. 8 down, 18 to go. Join us for part 2, when we'll continue the countdown.
That was a lot of marshals, and my voice is going to crack. I've talked too much, and I've talked too long. So this is probably going to be split into 2 parts to make it more digestible for you viewers. But I hope you appreciated the other insights, and I tried to fill in some of the gaps that Epic History TV left, which I understand they did. Otherwise their video would be 2 hours long. But that's the point of these reactions, right? That I'm supposed to be giving you guys some interesting commentary. And yeah, I hope you liked the video, and subscribe for more. We'll be continuing this series soon. And maybe next time we don't have to talk too much because there are less marshals being covered in each video. So yeah. But in any case, I'll see you guys later.